The Zephyrian Confederation had ruled 17 star systems for over 3 centuries and considered themselves the dominant military power in their region of the galaxy. Admiral Krixtal commanded their most powerful fleet from his flagship above the capital world of Zephyria Prime. He had been the one who ordered the destruction of New Haven and expected that the human response would be limited to angry messages and empty threats. The first warning came from long-range sensors at the edge of Zephyrian space. Technician Vextor reported massive energy signatures approaching from the direction of human space, but Admiral Krixtal dismissed the readings as equipment malfunctions. No species had ever assembled a fleet large enough to register on sensors. From such a distance, the human armada dropped out of hyperspace simultaneously across all 17 Zephyrian star systems at exactly noon Standard Time. 800,000 Warbringer ships appeared like a metal storm that blocked out the stars. The formation was so vast that Zephyrian observers could not count all the ships before the shooting started. Captain Paul Rivera aboard the UES Retribution transmitted a single message to every Zephyrian military installation before opening fire. The message was simple and delivered in the Zephyrian language that human intelligence had learned to speak. The words would be remembered by survivors for generations to come. This is for New Haven. The Zephyrian Defense Fleet at their primary military base numbered 300 ships, which had seemed impressive until 8,000 human vessels surrounded them. Major Tony Phillips led the assault on the fortress moon of Kethalar, where the Zephyrians kept their most advanced weapons. His ships moved in perfect coordination, overwhelming the defenders before they could mount an effective response. Admiral Krixtal watched in horror as his mighty fleet was torn apart by weapons that seemed impossible for humans to possess. The energy beams from the Warbringer ships cut through Zephyrian shields like they were made of paper. Ships that had dominated space battles for decades were reduced to scrap metal in minutes. The human attack was not random destruction, but carefully planned surgical strikes that targeted military installations while avoiding civilian areas. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan coordinated the bombardment of orbital shipyards above Zephyria 4, making sure that evacuation warnings were broadcast before the weapons platforms were destroyed. The Zephyrians had never faced an enemy that fought with such overwhelming numbers and superior technology. Their military doctrine was based on intimidating smaller species with displays of force, but the humans had brought more force than anyone had thought possible. The mathematical advantage was so extreme that resistance seemed pointless. Colonel Nancy Brooks led Marine assault teams that captured key installations after the orbital bombardments had softened the defenses. Her soldiers moved through Zephyrian military bases like an unstoppable tide, securing weapons and intelligence that would help humanity understand their enemy better. Captain Lucy Adams commanded the evacuation protocols that gave Zephyrian civilians time to flee before military targets were destroyed. The humans would not repeat the massacre that had been inflicted on New Haven. Children and families were given safe passage away from combat zones, while only military forces faced the fury of Earth's response. The battle for Zephyria Prime lasted exactly 4 hours, which was the same amount of time the aliens had spent destroying New Haven. The symbolism was not lost on the human crews who had memorized every detail of their colony's destruction. Justice was being served with mathematical precision. Commander Steve Clark led fighter squadrons that hunted down fleeing Zephyrian warships and destroyed them before they could escape to warn other systems. The humans had learned from studying the New Haven attack that showing mercy to military forces only allowed them to kill more innocents later. The Zephyrian military command tried desperately to coordinate a response, but their communication networks were among the first targets. Destroyed by human forces, ships that had been spread across multiple systems found themselves isolated and facing impossible odds as wave after wave of Warbringer vessels overwhelmed their positions. Dr. Janet Morris supervised the capture of Zephyrian technology that would help humanity defend against future alien threats. The energy weapons that had seemed so advanced during the New Haven massacre were primitive compared to what human scientists had developed during their months of preparation. Admiral Krixtal made a final attempt to rally his remaining forces for a counterattack, but found that most of his fleet had already been destroyed. The few ships that remained operational were badly damaged, and their crews were demoralized by the speed and efficiency of the human assault. The humans demonstrated tactical capabilities that the Zephyrians had never encountered. Lieutenant Commander Sandra Price coordinated communication between thousands of ships during the heat of battle, ensuring that every unit knew exactly where to strike for maximum effect. The level of organization required for such coordination was beyond anything the aliens had thought possible. Major Dan Carter led special forces teams that captured Zephyrian military leaders, including Admiral Krixtal himself. The alien commander who had ordered the death of 12,000 humans was taken alive so that he could answer for his crimes. He would live to see the complete destruction of his military forces. The orbital defense platforms that protected Zephyrian worlds were massive structures that had taken decades to build. Commander Tony Phillips targeted the power cores of these installations with precision strikes that caused them to collapse in spectacular explosions, visible from the planet's surface. The systematic destruction of Zephyrian military capability continued for 72 hours as human forces moved methodically through each system. Every shipyard was reduced to debris, every weapons platform was destroyed, every military base was captured or eliminated depending on whether the defenders chose to surrender. The psychological impact on Zephyrian society was as devastating as the physical destruction. A species that had dominated their region of space for centuries suddenly found themselves completely helpless against an enemy they had dismissed as primitive. The reversal of fortune was total and irreversible. Captain Rivera received regular reports from all sectors of the operation and was satisfied with the precision of his forces. The humans were not engaged in random destruction, but in the careful elimination of military threats. The Zephyrians would never again have the capability to threaten human colonies. The few Zephyrian ships that attempted to flee to neutral space were intercepted by human patrols and given a choice. They could surrender and be interned as prisoners of war, or they could be destroyed like the rest of their military forces. Most chose surrender when they realized that resistance was futile. By the end of the third day, the Zephyrian Confederation existed only as a collection of defenseless worlds whose military had been completely eliminated. The species that had thought nothing of committing genocide against human colonists now faced the complete destruction of their ability to wage war. The message had been delivered with overwhelming clarity. Humanity would not tolerate attacks on its civilians and possessed the capability to respond with devastating force. The galaxy would never again underestimate what humans were willing to do to protect their children among the stars. 6 months after the massacre at New Haven, the largest fleet in human history began gathering in Earth's orbital space. The construction yards that surrounded the planet worked without stopping as 800,000 Warbringer ships took their final shape. Each vessel was a masterpiece of human engineering designed for one purpose, which was to bring death to those who threatened human colonies. Captain Paul Rivera stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, watching as his fleet assembled around Earth. The flagship was the largest ship humans had ever built, and it bristled with weapons that could crack planets. Rivera had been chosen to lead this armada because he understood both strategy and the burning need for justice that drove every human aboard these ships. The Warbringer ships were identical in design, but each one carried a crew with their own story of why they had volunteered for this mission. Some had lost family members in the colonial expansion program. Others simply could not accept that humans would be murdered without consequence. All of them shared the same determination to ensure that New Haven would be avenged. Colonel Nancy Brooks commanded the Marine divisions that would follow the fleet's destruction with boots on the ground. Her soldiers were trained in fighting aliens and equipped with weapons designed to work in any environment they might encounter. They had studied every piece of data from the New Haven attack until they knew their enemy's tactics better than the aliens themselves. The ships were crewed by volunteers from every nation on Earth and every human colony in space. Commander Steve Clark had been a teacher before he joined the fleet, but the recordings from New Haven had changed him like they had changed everyone else. He now commanded a squadron of 50 Warbringer ships and dreamed of the day they would face the aliens who had killed innocent children. Dr. Janet Morris led the scientific teams aboard the fleet who had developed new weapons based on what they had learned from the alien attack. Human technology had advanced rapidly as Earth scientists worked to match the energy weapons that had destroyed New Haven. The new ships carried firepower that would have been impossible just a year earlier. The assembly of the fleet was broadcast live to every human settlement in the galaxy. People gathered around screens to watch as ship after ship took its place in the growing armada. Children who had been born after the New Haven massacre would grow up knowing that humanity protected its own, no matter how far from Earth they might live. Major Tony Phillips commanded one of the assault groups that would spearhead the attack on alien military installations. His ships were equipped with specialized weapons designed to penetrate enemy defenses, and his crews had trained endlessly for the mission ahead. They knew that the aliens would not expect such a massive response to what they had considered a minor action. The journey to alien space would take 8 months at maximum speed. During that time, the crews would continue training and preparing for the battles ahead. Every ship carried detailed intelligence about alien worlds and military capabilities that had been gathered by human spies and reconnaissance missions. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan oversaw the logistics of keeping 800,000 ships supplied during their long journey through space. The fleet carried enough ammunition and supplies to fight a war that could last for years. Every detail had been planned and prepared because failure was not an option when justice for New Haven was at stake. The departure ceremony was held on a Saturday morning when Earth's population could watch their children leave for war. President Helen Carter spoke to the assembled crews through video links that connected every ship in the fleet. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of an entire species' determination for justice. Captain Lucy Adams commanded the ships responsible for protecting civilians during the campaign ahead. The fleet's mission was to destroy alien military forces, but humans would not stoop to the level of those who had massacred New Haven. Innocent aliens would be given opportunities to evacuate before the bombardments began. The fleet's departure from Earth was a sight that would be remembered for generations. 800,000 ships moved away from humanity's homeworld in perfect formation, creating a river of light that stretched across the solar system. The formation was so large that it took 6 hours for all the ships to clear Earth's orbital space. Admiral Roy Hansen watched from Earth's surface as the fleet disappeared into the darkness between stars. He had helped plan this mission from the beginning and knew that it would change the balance of power throughout the galaxy. No alien species would ever again mistake human mercy for weakness. The ships traveled in groups of 10,000 with each group following a slightly different route to their destination. This would prevent the aliens from tracking the entire fleet and would allow the humans to attack from multiple directions simultaneously. The strategy had been tested in countless simulations and refined until it was perfect. Commander Dan Carter led one of the forward reconnaissance groups whose job was to scout alien defenses and report back to the main fleet. His ships were equipped with advanced sensors and stealth systems that would allow them to gather intelligence without being detected. The information they provided would be crucial to the success of the main attack. During the long journey through space, the crews maintained their equipment and continued their training. They studied the recordings from New Haven until every detail was burned into their memories. They practiced combat maneuvers until they could execute them perfectly, even under the stress of battle. The ships carried messages from families on Earth to the crews who would fight in their name. Children had drawn pictures of the fleet destroying alien ships, and parents had written letters of support for the soldiers who were risking their lives for justice. These messages reminded the crews why they were making this journey across the galaxy. Lieutenant Commander Sandra Price commanded the communication ships that would coordinate the fleet's actions during battle. The aliens had destroyed New Haven's ability to call for help, but this fleet would maintain constant contact with Earth throughout the campaign. The world would know immediately when justice had been served. As the months passed and the fleet drew closer to alien space, the crews felt the weight of their mission growing heavier. They carried the hopes and dreams of every human being who had ever looked up at the stars and wondered if they were safe. The massacre at New Haven had shown that the universe was a dangerous place, but humanity's response would show that humans were equally dangerous when their children were threatened. The alien species that had destroyed New Haven were about to learn what happened when you awakened the fury of humanity. 800,000 ships carrying the combined rage of an entire species were coming for them, and nothing in the galaxy would be able to stop what was about to happen. The message from New Haven arrived at Earth's orbital communication station on a cold Tuesday morning. Lieutenant Commander Amy Foster was on duty when the automated systems detected the incoming transmission from deep space. She had seen many routine messages from the distant colonies, but this one was different. The transmission was weak and broken, but the words that came through were clear enough to change everything. Dr. Lisa Wang's voice crackled through the speakers as she described the alien ships that had come to destroy New Haven. The recording was filled with the sounds of weapons fire and people screaming as they died. Amy Foster listened to the entire message 3 times before she understood what she was hearing. 12,000 human beings had been murdered by alien forces and their colony had been completely destroyed. She immediately forwarded the transmission to Admiral Roy Hansen at Earth Defense Command. Admiral Hansen was in a meeting with other military leaders when the message reached him. He stopped everything and played the recording for everyone in the room. The room fell silent as they heard Dr. Wang's desperate words and the sounds of a human colony being wiped out by alien weapons. General Kevin Murphy stood up when the recording ended and his face was red with anger. He had lost his brother in the colony ship program and knew that any of the colonists could have been his family. The other officers were equally shocked by what they had heard. Within an hour, the message had reached President Helen Carter in Washington. She called an emergency meeting of the Global Defense Council and ordered every world leader to attend. The recording from New Haven was played for presidents and prime ministers who had never imagined that humanity might face such a threat. The evidence was overwhelming and terrible. The aliens had not tried to communicate or negotiate. They had simply arrived and begun killing every human they could find. Children had died alongside their parents in what could only be called genocide. President Carter addressed the world that evening in a broadcast that was seen by every human being on Earth and in the space colonies. She played parts of Dr. Wang's recording and explained what had happened to the peaceful colony of New Haven. Her voice was steady, but everyone could hear the anger underneath. The response from Earth's population was immediate and unified. People who had never agreed on anything before came together in their outrage over the massacre. Protests filled the streets, but they were not protests against war, but demands for justice for the dead colonists. Director Amy Foster was promoted to head the Colonial Defense Initiative and given unlimited resources to prepare Earth's response. She worked with military leaders and scientists to design a plan that would ensure no human colony would ever face such destruction again. The decision was made to activate Protocol 7, which had been created years earlier as a last resort option. Every shipyard in the solar system received orders to begin building Warbringer-class assault ships. These ships were designed for one purpose, which was to bring overwhelming force against any enemy of humanity. The Warbringer ships were not exploration vessels or cargo haulers. They were weapons of war built to carry enough firepower to destroy entire fleets. Each ship would carry a crew of 12 highly trained soldiers and enough weapons to reduce planets to burning wastelands. General Murphy took charge of recruiting crews for the new fleet. He called for volunteers from every military service and was surprised when millions of people applied to serve. Everyone wanted to be part of Earth's response to the New Haven massacre. The industrial capacity of Earth was transformed overnight. Factories that had been making cars and computers were retooled to build weapons and ship components. Mining operations in the asteroid belt were expanded to provide the raw materials needed for the massive construction project. Dr. Susan Clark led the scientific teams that worked to improve human weapons technology. The aliens had used energy, weapons that were far beyond anything humans possessed, but Earth scientists were determined to close that gap. They studied every piece of data from New Haven to understand how the alien weapons worked. Captain Paul Rivera was chosen to command the flagship of the new fleet. He had served in the Space Navy for 20 years and had the experience needed to lead such a massive operation. He studied the recordings from New Haven until he knew every detail of how the aliens had conducted their attack. The construction of 800,000 Warbringer ships began at shipyards throughout the solar system. Workers labored around the clock to build the fleet that would carry Earth's vengeance to the stars. The ships took shape in orbital construction bays while their crews trained for the mission ahead. Colonel Nancy Brooks organized the Marine units that would follow the fleet to secure any worlds they captured. These soldiers were trained in fighting aliens and equipped with weapons designed to work in any environment. They studied alien technology and tactics until they knew their enemy better than the aliens knew themselves. The fleet would take 8 months to complete, But Earth was already planning beyond the immediate response. New military academies were built to train officers for future conflicts with alien forces. Research centers were established to develop even more powerful weapons and defenses. The message was sent to every human colony, warning them of the alien threat and providing defensive plans. No human settlement would be caught unprepared as New Haven had been. Earth was mobilizing to protect its children wherever they might be among the stars. As the months passed and the fleet took shape, Earth's determination only grew stronger. The faces of the New Haven colonists were displayed in public spaces, and their names were read aloud at military ceremonies. They had become symbols of what humanity was fighting to protect. The aliens who had destroyed New Haven had expected their attack to frighten humans into staying close to their homeworld. Instead, they had awakened something in humanity that would reshape the balance of power throughout the galaxy. Earth was preparing to show the universe what happened to those who threatened human children. The morning sun rose over New Haven like any other day, but this would be the last sunrise the colony would ever see. Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the command center, watching the miners head out to their work sites. He had been the security chief of New Haven for 3 years, and nothing had ever threatened the peaceful colony until today. Dr. Lisa Wang was in her lab studying the strange crystals they had found deep in the planet's crust. The crystals seemed to hold energy in ways that could change how humans traveled through space. She had sent reports to Earth about her discoveries, but it would take months for any reply to reach them across the vast distance of space. The 12,000 people living on New Haven had built a good life on this distant world. Children played in the gardens that had been carved from the rocky soil. Families gathered for meals in the communal halls. Workers shared stories about their day in the mines. Nobody knew that death was coming from the stars above. Captain Morrison received the first warning from the orbital sensors at 10 in the morning. 3 large ships had appeared at the edge of the solar system and were moving toward New Haven. The ships were bigger than anything humans had ever built, and they were not responding to communication attempts. Morrison called an emergency meeting with the colony leaders. Dr. Wang joined him along with Mayor Bill Parker and Chief Engineer Carol Hughes. They had 30 Marines to protect 12,000 civilians, but their weapons were meant for keeping peace among the colonists, not fighting alien warships. The alien ships were moving fast and would reach New Haven in 4 hours. Morrison ordered all civilians to gather in the underground shelters that had been built to protect against asteroid impacts. The shelters were deep and strong, but they had never been tested against weapons from space. Dr. Wang tried to contact Earth using the WAR long-range communication array. The message would take 3 weeks to reach home, but she had to try. She recorded everything she could about the approaching ships and sent it toward Earth, hoping someone would learn from what was about to happen. The alien ships arrived exactly when Morrison expected them. They were massive things that blocked out the sun as they hovered over the colony. The ships were dark metal with strange symbols carved into their hulls. They made no sound as they positioned themselves for attack. Morrison tried one last time to contact the alien ships. He sent messages in every language he knew and used mathematical formulas to show they wanted peace. The aliens did not respond with words, but with weapons that lit up the sky with deadly light. The first blast hit the power station and plunged half the colony into darkness. The second blast destroyed the communication array before Dr. Wang could send another message. The third blast hit the main residential area where families were running toward the shelters. Morrison and his Marines tried to fight back with their small weapons, but it was like throwing rocks at a mountain. The alien energy beams cut through, their defenses like they were made of paper. Buildings that had taken years to construct were turned to ash in seconds. The aliens were systematic in their destruction. They targeted every structure methodically, starting with anything that could be used for defense or communication. The medical center was destroyed along with all the doctors and nurses inside. The school where children had been learning was reduced to smoking rubble. Dr. Wang was trapped in her underground lab as the building above her collapsed. She could hear the screams of people dying and the terrible sound of energy weapons tearing apart everything humans had built on this world. She managed to activate an emergency beacon that recorded her final words. Morrison led his remaining Marines in a desperate attempt to reach the civilian shelters. They moved through streets filled with debris and bodies of people they had known and protected. The aliens showed no mercy for anyone they found. Men, women, and children were all targets for their weapons. The attack continued for 4 hours without stopping. The aliens took their time making sure nothing was left standing. They destroyed the farms that fed the colony and the workshops where tools were made. They even targeted the memorial garden where the first colonists who had died were buried. Morrison made it to Shelter 7 where 300 civilians were hiding. He found families huddled together in the darkness waiting for death to find them. Parents held their children close and tried to comfort them as the sounds of destruction echoed through the rock above their heads. The aliens used special weapons to find the underground shelters. They sent energy beams deep into the ground that collapsed the tunnels and crushed everyone inside. The screams stopped one by one as each shelter was found and destroyed. Morrison was in the last shelter to fall. Dr. Wang survived longer than most because her lab was deeper underground than the civilian shelters. She used her final minutes to record everything she had learned about the alien ships and their weapons. She hoped that someday humans would find her recordings and learn how to fight back against these monsters. When the attack finally ended, New Haven was gone. 12,000 people had died in a single day. The aliens had killed everyone they could find and destroyed everything humans had built. They left no message explaining why they had done this terrible thing. The alien ships departed as quietly as they had arrived. They left behind only death and destruction on a world that had once been filled with hope and dreams. The smoke from burning buildings rose into the sky like funeral pyres for an entire civilization. 3 weeks later, Dr. Wang's message reached Earth along with her recordings from the underground lab. The people of Earth would learn what had happened to their children among the stars, and they would not forget. The massacre at New Haven would demand an answer, and Earth would give one that the galaxy would never forget. News of the Zephyrian Confederation's complete military destruction spread across the galaxy faster than the human fleet had traveled to deliver it. The Galactic Council received reports from dozens of species who had witnessed the systematic elimination of what had been considered one of the region's most powerful military forces. 800,000 human warships had accomplished in 72 hours what many species thought would be impossible. Ambassador Rachel Stone represented Earth at the emergency session of the Galactic Council, held on the neutral world of Nexus Prime. She walked into the great assembly hall where representatives of 100 species waited to hear humanity's explanation for the devastating campaign against the Zephyrians. Her calm demeanor and simple business suit seemed out of place among the elaborate costumes and alien forms surrounding her. The Galactic Council had existed for thousands of years as a forum for resolving disputes between species through negotiation and compromise. They had never dealt with a situation where one species had demonstrated such overwhelming military superiority over another. The mathematics of human force projection had fundamentally changed the balance of power that had existed for millennia. Council Speaker Thal Wen of the ancient Altarian civilization called the session to order and asked Ambassador Stone to explain Earth's actions. The chamber fell silent as representatives from across the galaxy waited to hear how humanity would justify what many considered an extreme response to the New Haven incident. Rachel Stone stood at the central podium and activated a holographic display that showed images from the New Haven massacre. The assembly watched in stunned silence as Dr. Lisa Wang's final recordings played, showing the systematic murder of 12,000 human civilians, including children who had done nothing more than exist on a distant world. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The Zephyrian Confederation had committed genocide against a peaceful human colony without provocation or warning. They had killed every man, woman, and child they could find and destroyed everything humans had built on that world. The attack had been methodical and complete, leaving no survivors to tell the story, except for the recordings that had reached Earth weeks later. Ambassador Stone explained that Earth's response had been proportional to the crime committed against human civilians. The Zephyrian military forces that had participated in the massacre had been eliminated, but civilian populations had been protected and given opportunities to evacuate before military targets were destroyed. Humanity had shown the mercy that the Zephyrians had denied to New Haven. The representative from the Kepler Alliance asked about the size of the human fleet and whether Earth intended to use such forces against other species. Rachel Stone's answer was simple and direct. Humanity had no desire for conquest or empire, but would not tolerate attacks on human colonies or civilians. The 800,000 Warbringer ships would remain on patrol to ensure that no other species made the same mistake as the Zephyrians. Colonel Dan Carter supervised the establishment of human monitoring stations throughout former Zephyrian space. These installations would track ship movements and communications to ensure that no military forces were rebuilt that could threaten human settlements. The monitoring network would serve as an early warning system for any future threats to human colonies. The captured Zephyrian military leaders, including Admiral Crix Tall, were taken to a special facility on Earth where they would stand trial for genocide. The trials would be broadcast throughout human space so that everyone could see justice being served for the innocent victims of New Haven. The alien commanders would answer for every life they had taken. Commander Lisa Martinez organized the integration of refugee populations from species that had been oppressed by the Zephyrian Confederation. Many smaller civilizations had suffered under Zephyrian rule and welcomed the protection that human forces could provide. The elimination of Zephyrian military power had freed dozens of species from centuries of domination. The Galactic Council struggled to understand how a species that had been considered relatively primitive could assemble such overwhelming military force. Human technology had advanced rapidly, but the real shock was the industrial capacity that Earth had demonstrated. No other species had ever mobilized their entire civilization for war production on such a scale. Captain Paul Rivera addressed the council via video link from his flagship still patrolling Zephyrian space. He explained that humanity viewed the protection of its civilians as a sacred duty that took precedence over all other considerations. Any species that threatened human colonies would face the same response that had eliminated the Zephyrian military. The economic implications of Earth's military demonstration were enormous. Trade routes that had been controlled by the Zephyrians were now open to all species. Resources that had been monopolized by Zephyrian corporations became available to the galactic market. The destruction of their military power had created opportunities for peaceful development throughout the region. Dr. Susan Clark led research teams that studied captured Zephyrian technology and shared their findings with allied species. Humanity was not interested in hoarding advanced technology, but in building relationships that would prevent future conflicts. The knowledge gained from the campaign would benefit many civilizations. The Altarian representative asked about humanity's long-term intentions for the former Zephyrian territories. Ambassador Stone explained that Earth had no desire to rule alien worlds but would maintain a military presence sufficient to prevent the return of aggressive forces. Human colonies in the region would be protected, but other species would be free to govern themselves. Admiral Roy Hansen arrived from Earth to address questions about human military capabilities. He revealed that the 800,000 ship fleet represented only a fraction of Earth's industrial potential. Humanity could build larger fleets if necessary, but preferred to use diplomacy backed by the clear demonstration of overwhelming force. The psychological impact on the galactic community was as significant as the military destruction of Zephyrian forces. Species that had never heard of humans before the New Haven massacre suddenly found themselves studying human history and culture to understand what drove such determination. The concept of protecting civilians at any cost was foreign to many alien civilizations. Major Janet Morrison, daughter of the security chief who had died defending New Haven, was promoted to admiral and given command of the memorial fleet that would patrol human space. She carried her father's memory and the memory of all 12,000 colonists who had died. The fleet under her command would ensure that their sacrifice was never forgotten. The establishment of permanent human bases throughout the former Zephyrian region sent a clear message to any species considering aggression against human settlements. The bases were staffed by volunteers who understood that they were the guardians of human civilization's expansion into the galaxy. Trade relationships between Earth and dozens of species expanded rapidly as the galactic community sought to build positive relationships with humanity. The demonstration of human military power had been terrifying, But Earth's willingness to share technology and protect smaller species showed that humans could be valuable allies. The memorial on New Haven was rebuilt with contributions from species throughout the galaxy who wanted to honor the victims of the massacre. The simple inscription remained unchanged, but new monuments were added celebrating the courage of those who had defended the colony and the justice that had finally been served. Years passed, and the galaxy settled into a new order, where human, military power served as a deterrent against aggression, while human diplomacy worked to build lasting peace. The children of Earth had taken their place among the stars and proven that humanity would protect its own, no matter how far from home they might be. The 800,000 Warbringer ships continued their patrols, serving as a permanent reminder that the massacre at New Haven had consequences that would echo through history. No species would ever again mistake human compassion for weakness or believe that attacking human civilians would go unanswered.